The Yanari had a saying, the older the scar, the quieter the warning. Vel was 43 years into her posting as a diplomatic liaison for the Yanari Collective when she first heard the name Earth spoken in a tone that made the hair on her arms rise. Not because the tone was loud, because it was not. It was the kind of voice someone uses when they are trying very hard not to let their fear show and failing in small ways. The voice belonged to a being named Sauron. Sauron was the senior archivist for the Council of Assembled Worlds, the governing body that loosely held together the web of 62 spacefaring civilizations in the known galaxy. He was not a diplomat or a soldier. He was a small, quiet creature from a species called the Arath, with 6 fingers on each hand and large amber eyes that moved independently of each other. He had worked in the Council's archive system for over 90 years and was known for speaking in complete, careful sentences and never saying anything he had not already verified 3 times. Vel had come to him with a simple task. The Yanari Collective had been asked to review a petition from a species called the Brathian Union, who wanted Council permission to establish a mining operation in a system neighboring Earth. The review was standard. Vel needed background documentation on any existing territorial considerations in the region. Soren had pulled the file. He had read the first 3 lines, and then he had put the file down on his desk and sat very still for almost a full minute. Vel had asked if something was wrong. Soren had said the word Earth in that quiet voice, and then he had said, without looking at her, "Who approved this petition?" She told him. He nodded slowly, stood, and said he needed to make a call before he could continue. He asked her to wait. He was gone for 2 hours. When he came back, his expression had not changed, but something behind it had shifted. He sat down, folded his hands, and told her that the Brathian petition could not proceed. He said it calmly, the way he said everything. He said the region was flagged. Vil asked why. He told her the flag had been in place for 60,000 years, and that the original filing species no longer existed in any form he could locate in current records. He told her the flag carried no formal legal weight under current council law, because the law had been rewritten 11 times since the flag was placed, and the original language had no equivalent in modern legal code. But he said the flag was still there. And in his 90 years of archival work, he had made a personal policy of not ignoring things that had survived 60,000 years. Vel asked again, "Why is the region flagged?" Sauron looked at her for a moment. Then he opened a different file, not the Brathian petition, something older. He turned the screen toward her. The document was a contact report. It was brief. A survey team from the now-vanished species had made an approach to Earth's solar system during a period when humans were, by the report's own classification, an early industrial civilization with no space travel capability whatsoever. The team had intended a standard observation pass, nothing invasive, standard protocol. The report noted that within 18 hours of their arrival at the edge of the system, they had detected a narrowband signal being emitted from the planet's surface, directed at their ship, not a random broadcast, a directed signal, from a species with no known knowledge of faster-than-light travel and no reason to be looking in the right direction. The signal had contained a single piece of data, the survey team's own communication handshake, the encoded frequency signature their ship used to identify itself to home base. The humans had somehow captured it, decoded it, and sent it back. Attached to their own handshake was a second signal. The survey team's analysts had worked on it for days before understanding what it was. It was a map, not of space, of the survey ship's hull, a detailed schematic of the exterior of the vessel, accurate to within a few centimeters, constructed entirely from the light reflection data the ship had produced as it moved through the system. They had photographed the ship using light and built a blueprint from it and sent it back to show they could. The survey team left the system that same day. The flag was filed within the week. Vel read the document twice, then she looked at Soren. "This was 60,000 years ago," she said. "Early industrial, no space travel." "Correct," Soren said. "And they detected the ship within 18 hours and built a schematic of its hull. From reflected light data, yes." He folded his hands again. "The thing that has stayed with me in the years since I first found this record is not the schematic, it is the choice to send it back." He paused. They could have kept the information, studied it privately. Instead, they returned it. They wanted the survey team to know they had been seen. That is a very specific thing to want. Vel sat back in her chair. She thought about the Brathian petition, a mining operation, a routine expansion, the kind of thing the Council approved 40 times a year. "What happened to the species that filed the flag?" she asked. Soren was quiet for a moment. "I have not been able to determine that," he said. "Their records end approximately 2,000 years after this document was filed, quite abruptly." He did not say anything else. He did not need to. Vel spent the next 3 days thinking about reflected light. The oldest living being in the known galaxy was not famous. This was, in itself, unusual. The galaxy had a tradition of paying attention to age. Civilizations that had lasted long were studied, consulted, given formal seats and honorary titles and deference in chambers where decisions were made. Age meant memory. Memory meant information. Information was the thing every spacefaring species needed more of. But the being known as Thesson had no seat, no title, no formal affiliation with any governing body. Thesson was Quarrel, one of only 9 remaining members of a species that had been spacefaring for over 300,000 years. The Quarrel had, at various points in that history, been the most significant civilization in the known galaxy. They had explored more systems than any other species. They had made contact with more civilizations. They had built structures that still existed in deep space and that no other species had fully understood how to replicate. And then they had stopped, not because they fell, not because they were conquered. They had simply, over many thousands of years, gotten quieter, smaller, as if the galaxy had used up whatever need they had to be large in it. Thesson lived on a station he had built himself in a system that appeared in no official charts. Vel had taken 2 months to find the location and another 6 weeks to arrange transport that would bring her close enough to send a communication. The communication had been a simple request. She had stated who she was, what she wanted to know, and why she thought he might be the right being to ask. He had replied in 3 days, a single word, "Come." The station was small, old, and kept in perfect condition. When she docked and walked through the connecting passage, the air inside smelled like nothing she had encountered before, not unpleasant, simply entirely unfamiliar. Thesson was waiting in a room with curved walls and no furniture except 2 low seats facing each other. He was tall, thin, with skin that had turned a pale gold with age. His eyes were fully black and did not reflect light the way most eyes did. He did not offer any greeting. He simply waited for her to sit. She sat. She introduced herself. She told him concisely what she had found: the Soren archive record, the 4 Ynnari diplomatic files, the Brathian withdrawal, and the pattern she had traced across 60,000 years. She told him she had come because she believed the pattern was older than any records she had access to, and that he was the only being she had been able to identify who might have direct knowledge rather than archived knowledge. Thesson listened without moving. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What do you want to know?" She said, "What are humans?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he said something she had not expected. He said, "That is the wrong question. Every species that has tried to answer that question has learned less than they needed." She asked what the right question was. He said, "What have they decided to be?" He stood and moved to the curved wall, which shifted at his touch to become transparent. The system outside was unremarkable, distant light, scattered rock, the cold dark that existed between things. He stood looking at it with his hands behind his back. "We made contact with Earth 412 years after humans first achieved basic agriculture," he said. "This was 270,000 years ago. I was not alive then, but the record is the oldest continuous record the Quarrel maintain, and I have read it many times." Vel kept very still. The contact team observed a settlement for 40 days. They were careful. The distance they maintained should have made them invisible to any species at that level of development. He paused. On the 31st day, the humans below lit fires on the hillsides in a pattern. The contact team's analyst first thought it was a religious ceremony. Then they realized the pattern matched the position of the Quarrel ships in orbit, not approximately, exactly, down to the spacing between the three vessels. Vel said nothing. The humans could not see the ships, not with any technology we believed they possessed, but they knew where the ships were. They showed the contact team they knew, and then they waited. He turned from the window. The contact team departed on day 32. They did not feel threatened. That is important. They did not feel threatened. They felt seen, completely, accurately, and without any possibility of pretending otherwise. And they left because there is a very specific feeling that comes from being observed by something that understands more than you thought it could. And that feeling makes it very difficult to pretend you are the one in control of the situation. Vel thought about the survey team 60,000 years ago, about the schematic built from reflected light, about equipment failures and aborted missions, and a petition withdrawn on the 41st day. "It has always been like this," she said. "It was not a question." "Yes," Thesson said. "From the beginning." He sat back down across from her. "The question is not what they are. Every species that asks that question learns one capability, one fact, one impressive thing, and thinks they now understand. The question is what they have decided to be, because they could be something else. Something that acts on what they know, what they can do, what they have always been able to do. They have chosen, for as long as the Quarrel record exists, not to." "Why?" Vil asked. Thesson was quiet for a moment. "That," he said, "you will have to ask them." Getting a meeting with Earth's diplomatic office took 11 days, which Vel thought was surprisingly fast. She had expected delays. She had expected the kind of careful bureaucratic friction that small or cautious civilizations used to slow down contact with unfamiliar parties. Instead, she received a response within 30 hours of her initial communication, confirming availability for a direct meeting, listing 3 possible dates in the next 2 weeks, and asking politely if she had any requirements for the meeting environment. The meeting would take place on Earth's orbital station, not the planet itself. Vel had not asked for the distinction and did not know what it signified. The station was larger than she had expected and older than anything she had read about human construction. The exterior was functional rather than decorative, but functional in a way that communicated something about the people who built it. No wasted surface, no empty gesture. Every component placed exactly where it needed to be and not an inch further out than required. It reminded her of Thesson's station, actually. That same quality of things built to last by someone who had thought carefully about what lasting meant. The diplomatic officer who met her at the dock was a man named Addies. He was in his mid-50s, average height, with gray at his temples and a handshake that was firm without being a performance. He said it was good to meet her and sounded like he meant it. He led her through the station corridors, which were clean and well lit, and had art on the walls, actual art, not informational panels, not status displays, painted things that seemed to serve no purpose except to be looked at. She asked about the art as they walked. He said humans had always put art in places where people spent a lot of time. He said someone had once described it as the species refusing to accept that utility and beauty had to be separate categories. She filed that away and said nothing. The meeting room was plain. A table, chairs, a window looking out at the planet below, blue and white mostly, a great deal of water. She had read the statistics, but the reality of looking at it was different from the numbers. Addies brought a second person with him, A woman named Fenna who was introduced as a senior analyst and who said nothing during the first part of the meeting, but listened with the kind of focused attention that made Vel aware of every word she chose. Vel laid out her situation directly. She said she had spent several months researching Earth's history in relation to other spacefaring civilizations. She had found records going back 60,000 years. She had spoken with a Quarrel elder who had shared documentation going back further. She said she was not here to make accusations or demands. She said she wanted to understand what she was looking at. Addes listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What specifically do you want to understand?" She said she wanted to understand the choice. Why, across hundreds of thousands of years of recorded history with capabilities that were clearly significant even when humans were early in development, Earth had consistently chosen a form of restraint that was not passivity. It was active. The signals sent back, the fire patterns on the hillsides, the probe placements that told visiting species they had been seen. All of it said, "We know you are there." None of it said, "We are coming for you." Addes looked at her. He glanced once at Fenna, then he looked back at Vel. "We had a long time to think about it," he said. "Long by our own history, I mean. We fought each other for most of that history, every shape of conflict you can imagine, and we got very good at it, both at doing it and at surviving it." He paused. "There was a period, we call it the consolidation. It happened roughly 300 years ago by our calendar, when for the first time in our history, we had enough peace inside our own species to actually think about what we wanted to do with everything we had built." Vel waited. "The conclusion we came to was not comfortable," he said. "We had capabilities that most species in the galaxy did not have. We had developed them under pressure, because pressure is what we had always had. And we could use them the way most species with significant capabilities do, to expand, to secure, to take territory and resources and make the kind of arrangements that powerful civilizations usually make." He folded his hands on the table. "We decided we did not want to do that. Not because we thought we would lose. We were reasonably confident we would not lose. We decided we did not want to do it because we had already seen what that looked like from the inside, across our own history, and we did not like what it made of the ones doing it." Fenna spoke for the first time. "We had a word," she said. "In an old language, it translated roughly as the shape a thing takes when it does the same thing often enough." She looked at Vel steadily. "We did not want the shape that came from doing that." Vel thought about 60,000 years of records, about species that had approached and withdrawn, about the Brathian petition cancelled on day 41, about Thesson saying the question was not what they were but what they had decided to be. "So you chose restraint," Vel said. "We chose to be trustworthy," Addes said. "Those are different things." She understood the difference when he said it. Restraint was a held breath. Trust was something you built slowly, by doing the same thing many times until the people watching you stopped wondering if you would change. Fenna offered to show her something after the meeting. Vel had not expected this. Diplomatic meetings at this level usually ended at the table. The handshake, the formal close, the careful walk back to the docking bay. Fenna offered it in the same direct way she had spoken during the meeting, not a performance of generosity, just a thing she thought would be useful. She led Vel down 3 levels from the meeting room and into a part of the station that was clearly not for visitors. The corridors here were narrower, and the wall panels showed data rather than art. Personnel moved through them with the focused efficiency of people who had too much to do and were doing it anyway. No one looked at Vel with surprise or suspicion. A few nodded at Fenna and kept moving. Fenna brought her to a room with a long curved display surface covering one entire wall. On the display was a map, not of space, but of time. A long horizontal line representing hundreds of thousands of years, with markings at irregular intervals, some grouped close together, some widely spaced. Vel looked at it for a moment. "What is this?" "We call it the contact record," Fenna said. She moved to the display and touched one of the earlier markings. The date and a brief notation appeared. Every confirmed approach by a non-human vessel to our system or its immediate surrounding space. Every one we detected, going back as far as our records allow. Vel looked at the density of the markings. There were more than she had expected, many more. The earliest cluster was thick with them, closed together, frequent, across a span of what appeared to be tens of thousands of years. Then they thinned. Then thinned more. The most recent portion of the line, representing roughly the last 5,000 years, was nearly empty. They stopped coming, Vel said. Fewer come, Fenna said. We think word travels, not formally, not as official policy from any governing body, just word travels. She touched another marking. This one is yours. The Yanari archivist Soren located our flag in the council system 63 days ago. We noted it. Vel turned to look at her. You monitor the council archive system. We monitor traffic patterns related to specific index terms, yes. Fenna said it without apology or emphasis, the way she might note that they tracked atmospheric data. It helps us understand who is paying attention and why. Vel looked back at the map. She pointed to the early cluster, the densest section. This period, what was happening then? Fenna moved to it. This is roughly 80,000 years ago to 40,000 years ago. The period when we believe we were most interesting to visiting species, because we were clearly developing quickly and our capabilities were difficult to classify using standard frameworks. She traced the cluster with a finger. Most of these approaches ended the same way. The visitors arrived, spent some time in the system, became aware that we were aware of them and left. And after that, why did it thin out? Some species told others. Some worked it out themselves after long enough watching us. Some just, she paused, choosing the word carefully, decided the calculation did not favor action. She turned away from the display. There was one period approximately 52,000 years ago where a civilization called the Drath attempted something different. They did not approach quietly. They sent a formal demand. Resource extraction rights, territorial claim, the standard package. Vel had not encountered any record of the Drath. What happened? We responded to the demand formally. We acknowledged receipt. We told them we were not in a position to accept their terms. We asked if they wanted to negotiate alternative arrangements. Fenna's expression did not change as she said this. They sent a second message restating the original demand with a timeline attached. And we sent them our complete sensor record of their fleet from the moment it entered the outer system. Every ship, every position, every internal communication frequency we had been able to isolate. We sent it back to them with a note that said, "These are the assets you have committed to this position. We have read them completely. We want you to know that before you send a third message." Vel was quiet for a moment. Did they send a third message? No, Fenna said. They sent an ambassador. She almost smiled. That was the beginning of a trade relationship that lasted 400 years. Vel looked at the map again. The long line, the thick early cluster, the slow thinning, the recent quiet. She thought about what Addis had said, that they had chosen to be trustworthy rather than restrained. That the difference was a thing built over time, by doing the same thing consistently until the people watching believed it. You have been doing this for a very long time, Vel said, not a question. Yes, Fenna said. And the record on that wall, does it ever make you feel, Vel searched for the word, isolated, knowing how many species approached and chose to stay away? Fenna considered the question seriously. There was a period when our leadership debated whether to reach out more actively, whether to make ourselves easier to approach, make the capabilities less visible, the record less readable. She looked at the map. The decision that came back was that making ourselves smaller would not make us more trustworthy. It would just make us easier to misread, and a misread is where the problems start. Vel understood that. She had spent months reading old records of misreads, species that approached what they thought was an underdeveloped world and discovered, at various stages of the encounter, that they were wrong. The Drath ambassador, she said. The one who came after the second message. Were they afraid? Fenna thought about it. They were prepared, she said, which is a more useful thing to be. Vel stayed on the human orbital station for 4 days. She had planned to stay 1. She extended the first day because Addie's offered to answer follow-up questions and she had many. She extended the second because Fenna brought her into a working session with a team of human analysts and she found herself unable to leave. She extended the third because she needed time to think, and something about the station made thinking easier than it usually was. The art on the walls, the particular quality of the quiet in the corridors at night. The way the people who worked there moved with focus, but without urgency, as if they trusted themselves to get where they were going without rushing. On the 4th day, she walked to the observation deck alone and looked at Earth below. She had looked at a great many planets from orbit in her career. This one was not the largest or the most visually striking. It was not the oldest civilized world or the richest in resources. By standard metrics, it ranked somewhere in the middle of the 62 Council species home worlds on almost every category. And yet, she thought about what Thesson had told her. 270,000 years of coral records. Contact with early agricultural humans who had tracked 3 ships in orbit by watching where the shadows fell wrong. Fire patterns on hillsides that matched the exact position of vessels no human eye could see. She thought about the contact map on Fenna's wall. The dense early cluster, the slow thinning, the long quiet of the last 5,000 years, as if the galaxy had gradually, without any announcement, decided to give Earth its space. Addie's found her on the observation deck mid-morning. He brought 2 cups of something warm and offered her one without asking if she wanted it. She took it. It was slightly sweet and had a smell she could not identify. She asked him, while looking at the planet, what humans thought about the fact that they were, in a very real sense, alone out here. Not alone in the galaxy, but alone in the particular way of being a species that other civilizations had, over a very long time, learned to approach carefully and from a distance. He stood beside her and looked at the planet too. He was quiet for a moment. "We are not as alone as the map makes it look," he said. "The Drath trade relationship lasted 400 years. We have had 12 sustained relationships with other species over the last 2,000 years, most of them productive, a few of them genuinely good." He paused. "The ones who come prepared, as Fenna would say, tend to find us much easier to deal with than the ones who come with assumptions." Vel thought about that. The Yanari will want to know what to recommend regarding Earth. Formally, I mean. Whether to pursue closer engagement, whether to endorse the framework the Council has for developing member relationships. "We know," Addie said. "We read the Yanari internal policy tracker." She turned to look at him. He met her look calmly. "Public feeds only," he said. "The kind any species in the Council can access with a basic subscription. You just have to know which feeds are worth tracking." He looked back at the planet. "We would welcome a formal relationship with the Yanari Collective. We think your approach to this situation, starting with the archive, asking questions, finding Thesson, coming here directly, suggests a thoughtfulness that would make the relationship productive." Vel thought about Torvin, about the 4-3 vote to delay the Brathian endorsement, about the Brathian withdrawal on day 41. "Did you contact the Brathian Union?" she asked, "during the petition review period?" Addie's did not answer immediately. He sipped from his cup. "We sent them a message," he said, "a brief one, informational in nature." She did not ask what the message contained. She thought she understood. She looked at Earth one more time. Blue and white and patient down there, turning slowly. A world that had been seen and studied and approached and circled for hundreds of thousands of years, and had never once needed to shout to be heard. "I have one last question," she said. "Yes." "The very first contact, the Coral team 270,000 years ago, the fires on the hillsides. Your ancestors could not have known who was in those ships, what they were, how powerful they were, whether they were a threat. She turned to look at him. They had no information except that something was in orbit above them, and they lit fires to say, "We see you." Why? What made the first ones choose to signal rather than hide? Addes looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at the planet. "We think about that," he said. "There are historians who have spent careers on that question. The honest answer is that we do not know exactly. We have guesses. The one that most people find convincing is that our ancestors were curious rather than afraid, that their first instinct when they did not know something was to reach toward it rather than away from it." He paused. "And possibly, this is the part that is harder to prove, that they understood even then that being seen was better than being caught hiding." Vel thought about 60,000-year-old flags, about species that had vanished from the records 2,000 years after a brief contact, about the Drath ambassador who had arrived prepared, about what it meant to be a species that had chosen, at every stage of its development, to be known rather than hidden, trusted rather than feared, met as an equal rather than approached as a prize. She finished the warm drink. She set the cup down on the rail. "I will recommend formal engagement," she said. Addes nodded. "We hoped you would." She left the next morning. The docking bay attendant who cleared her ship for departure was a young human who smiled and said, "Have a good journey," with the ease of someone who had said it 1,000 times and still meant it. She thought about that smile for a long time on the way home. She kept returning to it, not to the schematic itself, not to the signal, but to the method. A species that could not leave its own atmosphere had looked at the movement of light bouncing off a visiting ship and built a picture of its exterior from that. The way you might reconstruct a room from shadows. The way you might understand a stranger by watching their reflection rather than their face. She had studied diplomacy for her entire career. She had studied the way civilizations signaled each other, strength, weakness, desire, warning. She had learned that the most dangerous signals were not the loud ones. They were the ones that were precise and quiet and left no room for misunderstanding. She filed a holding notice on the Brathian petition and requested a meeting with the Ynnari Senior Council. They were skeptical. She had expected that. The Senior Council was composed of 7 individuals who had each spent decades in interstellar policy, who had navigated trade wars and border crises, and 3 near conflicts in the Outer Rim. They were not easily moved by old archive records and a flag with no legal weight. The one who pushed back hardest was a council member named Torvin. He was direct by nature and had no patience for what he called pre-scientific anxiety, the tendency of newer council members to treat the galaxy's history as a source of superstition rather than data. He pointed out that 60,000 years was a long time, that the humans of 60,000 years ago were not the humans of today, that a primitive civilization capable of detecting reflected light was impressive but not a security concern for a modern spacefaring union. Vel told him she agreed with all of that, and that the Brathian petition was not the issue. The issue was whether there was information available that the Ynnari should understand before taking positions in that region of space. Torvin asked what information. She told him about Soren, about the archive, about the flag, and then she told him something she had not yet told anyone, that after leaving Soren's office she had done her own search, using the Ynnari Collective's private diplomatic archive, which was separate from the council system and had been maintained continuously for 40,000 years. She had found 4 additional records, not filed by the council, filed by species that had been Ynnari trade partners at various points in history and had shared documentation as part of those relationships. 4 separate civilizations across 4 different centuries, each of whom had made some form of approach to Earth's region of space and documented what happened after. None of the 4 documents described a military engagement. Two described equipment failures that forced an early departure from the region, failures that the filing teams had attributed to technical malfunction, but had been unable to replicate after returning home. One described a crew that had become increasingly unsettled during a survey pass near Earth, reporting a persistent sense of being observed from all directions, leading the mission commander to abort the survey 3 weeks ahead of schedule. The fourth simply noted that a planned expansion into the region had been canceled following a senior leadership review, and that the reasons for cancellation were not for general distribution. Torvin listened to all of this without interrupting, which was not usual for him. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he asked whether she was suggesting that Earth was somehow responsible for any of these outcomes. Vel said she was not suggesting anything. She was presenting records that existed. She was nodding that a pattern existed across 60,000 years involving approaches to Earth resulting in departures, cancellations, and one case of unexplained equipment failure. She was suggesting the Yanari should at minimum understand what they were looking at before endorsing a petition to operate in that space. The Senior Council voted 4-3 to delay endorsement of the Brathian petition, pending further review. Torvin voted against the delay, but after the meeting he found Vel in the corridor and walked with her for a moment in silence. Then he asked, without looking at her, what she personally thought was happening. She thought about it carefully before she answered. She said she thought 60,000 years of records suggested that Earth was not what it appeared to be from a standard civilizational assessment. She said she thought the signal sent back to the survey team 60,000 years ago was a message that had been sent to every species that approached since, and most of them had understood it without knowing it was being sent. Torvin asked what the message was. Vel said, "We see you, we know you are there, we know more about you than you know about us, and we are choosing not to act on that, right now." Torvin walked with her for another few steps. Then he turned and went back the way he had come without saying anything else. The Brathian petition sat in review for 60 days. No one from the Brathian Union contacted Vel to ask about the delay. But on the 41st day, quietly and without explanation, the Brathian Union withdrew the petition entirely. Vel noted the timing, 41 days. She did not know what the Brathian Union had found out, or who had told them, or whether they had simply arrived at the same conclusion she had through their own research. She noted it and said nothing. Some things were better added to the record without commentary.